On today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, with their first three picks, the Houston Texans go all offense, which helps answers questions about their offensive direction for 2025.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily podcast on the Houston Texans. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Battle Red Nation, we are here. We finally made it. The end of draft week and draft season is over with. We get ready for the OTAs coming up soon, rookie mini camps. But thank you for checking out today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. I'm your Texans Credential Media member and insider, John Hickman. No SARS right now for today's show, but thank you for making us your first listen of the day and for being a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And for the last 3 days, I'm sure many of you guys' eyes, 2 or 4, have been glued to the TV watching the Houston Texans, Nick Caserio, D'Amico Ryans, and that front office team trade up, trade back, move around the board, operate like they wanted to operate in order to come away with the best picks that they feel will help the Houston Texans. We'll close off today's show looking at the future for the new offensive lineman, Aireontae Ersery, and the Texans offensive line future. Houston Cyclones, the Houston Texans draft both Jayden Higgins and Jaylin Noel. They team up here in Houston. But I want to open up today's show just looking at the vision, and the Houston Texans doing a very good job of bringing that to life. Before I dive into that conversation, today's episode is brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay tuned for the Armada draft pick of the week later in today's show. Guys, I'm extremely excited to talk Texans with you guys today. It's been a couple of days, but I am back to talk the draft and how it all played out for the Houston Texans. First pick, Jayden Higgins, Iowa State wide receiver. Second pick, Minnesota tackle, Aireontae Ersery. Jaylin Noel, wide receiver, Iowa State. Jalen Smith, cornerback, USC. Woody Marks, running back, USC. Jalen Reed, safety, Penn State. Graham Hurts, quarterback, Florida. Keontae Hamilton, D-tackle, Rutgers. Luke Lakey, tight end, Iowa. Throughout the offseason, we've heard both D'Amico and Nick Caserio mention a few things about the roster that they will put together. Competition came up a lot. D'Amico mentioned getting speed and highlighted it as a trait he's looking for, not only for his slot receivers, but mentioned speed a lot for the team altogether. That was a team need for the wide receiver position. They reiterated that aside from the popular belief where the offensive line stood currently, they were confident in their offensive line room and the changes that were made, starting with promoting Cole Popovich. Ryans once said, I want to see that toughness and nastiness of how guys finished their blocks when he was asked about the offensive line and what is he looking for, and also emphasize the importance of giving CJ Stroud time. A lot of these things came to fruition during the NFL draft over the weekend for Houston. Chris Sims described Aireontae as one of the best true pass protecting tackles in the draft this year. And here on this show, I've raved about Jayden Higgins, describing him as a polished year 2 version of Nico Collins who could benefit from playing with Stroud in his first year. And then they went to add his teammate, Jaylin Noel. I'll dive into those two players and the impact I believe they'll have for this team in segment 2. The first 3 picks for Houston were impact players that we should see somewhat have a role day one and compete for playing snaps. Houston currently has 8 tackles, including Titus Howard, but only 5 guards. And one of those guards is a player, Ed Ingram. 12 receivers, excluding Tank Dell. We know that he won't be back for 2025. 12 receivers are on this roster. 8 of those are on 2 or less year deals. 7 are on 1-year contract deals. So you look at the need for receiver moving past 2025 and 2026. Even on the back end of this draft, Luke Lakey, Woody Marks, Jalen Reed, tight end, running back, safety. There is competition on this roster. The youth is there for this roster, and more importantly, the contingency plan for the future is there for this roster. This was Houston's plan all along. Pay our top guys money. Our top guys are getting top money. Derek Stingley, Danielle Hunter, the preparation for CJ Stroud, Will Anderson in the coming years. They brought back Jalen Petrie. He got, at the time of his deal, he broke the reset the market for safety for nickel cornerbacks, and then they wanted to operate within a 2-year time window, 2-year frame to keep their championship window open by drafting players that fit the mold of what they're building off of Kirby in the NRG Stadium. I think for the most part, they were able to come away from this draft with that vision intact and with the players that they brought in, right? I can't wait to dive into the 2 receivers. And for some of you guys who've been here for a while, it'll just be memory lane. We'll go down memory lane, right? When we talk about Higgins and Noel teaming up here in Houston. But I think what Houston went through the last 2 years, specifically the last season, they were banking on players that were already here, that they really liked, but those players were not able to make a jump. And without those jumps being made, and without the coaching in place, and with Ben McDaniels, I think Ben McDaniels right now is on a how can I put it? He's on somewhat of a warm seat. I don't want to say hot seat, warm seat. But without players like John Mechie, without players like Xavier Hutchinson, without seeing the growth from the offensive line, young guys, right? With the ups and downs in that group, I think Houston looked at everything for the last 2 years, specifically for the last 2 seasons, and said to themselves, we have to get younger. And because we were not able to strike when the iron was hot immediately off of last offseason, one thing Sarge mentioned a lot was where's the splash, right? You look at last year, Danielle Hunter, Joe Mixon, and all of the moves that were made during the offseason, that didn't lead to the Houston Texans getting to an AFC championship game or a Super Bowl. So now Houston reset. Those pieces are still in place, but the bottom half of that offense, the bottom half of this roster altogether failed them, and they were able to bring in guys to kind of push some of those other guys out of the way. So we'll talk about the 2 main guys that may be moved out of the way because of the Houston Texans draft. Jayden Higgins and Jaylin Noel, you guys are going to really love those players. And so when we come back, once again, it's time to talk about why the Houston Texans vision is intact after the draft by talking the actual players. And again, if you're new here, then get ready to talk receivers. But for some of you, for our everydayers, get ready to walk down memory lane as I remind you about Slick Casario a couple of months ago saying that Jayden Higgins and Jaylin Noel will be 2 players that the Houston Texans could absolutely benefit from. We got more Locked On Texans, and now we're going to dive into the draft. The first 3 picks, Higgins, Aireontae, Noel. But before we do that, there is nothing like the atmosphere of the NBA playoff game. Detroit and New York just had an all-timer. The Rockets and the Warriors, they are having a back and forth. That series is getting exciting. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge. It's electric in the arena, and with Game Time, you can be a part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Game Time makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer to the game, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. This is why Game Time is one of the best. Save up to 60% on buying last-minute tickets for sports, concert, comedy events, and theater events happening near you. The all-in pricing means no surprise fees at checkout. What you see is what you pay for. You take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back here, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. Now it's time to talk players. But before we do that, there was a tweet from February that read like this. Nick Caley is now in Houston, and the growing thought is how Houston can raise its floor in the wide receiver room. I really like a few guys in the later rounds, 3 through 6, for the Texans. Jayden Higgins and Jaylin Noel, an Iowa State duo that balled Texans
out,
listeners and viewers, let's dive into that.
of Nico Collins
And also, let's look at how both of those players
respectfully
impact the Houston Texans right now. So welcome back, Texans fans. The Texans traded out of the first round, but they didn't make you wait as long as the NFL made Shadur Sanders and Quinn Ewers wait to get drafted. And with their first pick, Houston went Jayden Higgins at 34 and then added his teammate down the line, Jaylin Noel, in the third. Love that Houston recognized the need to invest in weapons, something they refused to do in last year's draft. And I was very disappointed in them when they did it then. I love both picks for the Houston Texans, and these are two guys that have right now and long-term impact capability. So when we look at the right now for Jayden Higgins, brings the immediate upgrade for the outside Z receiver need. Can play outside, can play more so of a power slot role for the Houston Texans in 2024. Routes run wide out, nearly 72% of Jayden Higgins' routes outside, nearly 28% of his routes run were in the slot position. So you look at a versatile, big slot receiver who can also go outside, and the creativity that we can't wait to see from Nick Caley, led all college football receivers with 66 first downs in 2024, under 2% drop rate in 2024, some of the best route selling in this draft, which has allowed him to create major separation, has a lot of Nico Collins in his game, big body receiver with very underrated speed, great hands that can bully corners, and I think he has a higher red zone factor ability, X factor, in terms of being able to dominate in the red zone. This is where I kind of give him the nod over Nico, which is kind of weird for some people to hear. And he's also a willing blocker. All of the traits this offense needs, and I can't wait to see new offensive coordinator Nick Caley get creative with getting the ball in his hands. And then when I look over at Jaylin Noel, a guy that gives Houston great depth, better speed, and an answer for return specialists. 4.3 40 speed, first team All Big 12 honors as a return specialist in 2024. Big playability with 7 career touchdowns of 50 or more yards. His speed and separation ability, along with his ability to muscle corners at times, right? This guy bench pressed 225 over 20 times. So all of that combined gives him leverage to win one-on-one matchups. Plus, I love his ability to find and sit into zones, very QB friendly. And I feel like with him and the creativity that we want to see in 2025, in this modern day football era, he could be a more dangerous weapon than Jayden Higgins. Also, when I look at the long-term ability these two guys bring, these are two guys that by the time Houston has to make a decision on which receiver to choose from, young or old, Houston will have a good problem on their hands. I like Higgins as a contingency plan for Nico Collins, as well as a long-term fit on the other side. The two can be paired together for some time. I think both of these young men bring pressure, immediate pressure on John Mechie and Xavier Hutchinson, former Cyclone himself, and make a possible Houston decision to move on from them easier, depending on how camp turns out. Great competition, which is what D'Amico and Nick Caserio have talked about all offseason. Great competition. And I think Noel is a high-key insurance plan for Tank Dell. And I'm not saying Houston will move on from him, right? The last 2 seasons to open up his NFL career, and we love Tank Dell here on this show. I think he's a great player. I think he's a great person. But they have ended in injuries. That has left Nico Collins out there on an island by himself. He will not play in 2025. If he plays in 2025, I would be shocked, and I'd probably donate my December check to charity, right? But I don't think he's going to play this year. I kind of question, because of the severity of that injury, when will he be able to come back and play for Houston? And when he does come back, how long will it take for him to actually get on the field and get back to himself? It took a little bit last year. So with this major injury, how long? We talked about this before. Houston is in a great position if Higgins or Noel or both of these guys from this draft have a solid first year and can complete their rookie season. 17 games. If they go out there and play 15, 17, complete it all together, that's a plus. They go out there and have solid contribution to the offense, to the special teams, that's a plus. They go out there and get that chemistry with CJ Stroud, and they are getting a jump. Keep in mind, they are getting the jump on Tank Dell, coming into a new season with a new OC that may switch things up. So that gives them a plus as well. This is really a win-win for Houston if they both pan out from a playing standpoint, but also financially. These two players extend Houston's cap space situation with two rookies on rookie contracts, aiding them to where in a year or two, we don't have to pay a big name receiver if our guys are working out. If Higgins looks like he's close to 1,000 yards, if Noel is a guy that can impact the offense by doing things in a specialty way, and he's also a return man that's giving our special teams some great opportunities. No big money that needs to be spent besides Nico Collins, gives Houston flexibility, and CJ and Caley have two clear and dangerous weapons to kick off this new era of Texans offensive identity. This gives Houston, I think, a great position to be in. A great position to be in. The speed from a 4.4 from a 6'4 receiver, that's special. A 4.3 from a player that doesn't necessarily get creative in space, but he can get you those first downs. And he can win one-on-one matchups on the inside. And that gives Houston and CJ Stroud the leverage, again, to get creative, to attack teams north and south, because of how easily it is for both of those players to get to a spot and get open to that spot. And that allows for the offense to be efficient. And they put two guys on notice, right? Again, I gave you guys the number. 7 receivers are on 1-year deals. They have 1 year left on their contract with the Houston Texans. Now we got to shift our conversation over to what really hurt Houston last year. And that was the amount of hits CJ Stroud took. And a lot of people came into this draft thinking to themselves, we need the best offensive lineman available. And that was a conversation. Right here on this show, Sarge and I have talked about, and I have reiterated time and time again, while it may not be, the message may not be how the fans feel, how the outside feel in the NRG Stadium off Kirby, they feel like they have a guy that can coach up the players to get them to their max potential. Chris Strausser just wasn't that guy. Cole Popovich is believed to be that guy. And so now when we look at the players in the offensive line, now to the player that said he watches Laramie Tunsil to add to his game, Aireontae Ersery, where does he play on this offensive line? Will he be a day one starter? Will he be a guy that is viewed more so like Blake Fisher was last year? When we need you, just be ready. Or does Houston feel like they absolutely need him day one? So we got more up next. This is the Houston Texans' first 3 picks draft show here on the Locked On Texans podcast. The Armada pick of the week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. This week, we're highlighting the top pick from the Texans draft, the one selection that truly stood out, the guy who showcased the strength and the power to push the Texans forward as we look ahead to the 2025 season. This week, Armada and clear-cut top pick of the draft is no other than Jayden Higgins. Why? Well, do you feel like the Houston Texans wide receiver room that featured just Nico as a reliable threat, and Hutchinson and Mechie and Berrios and Justin Watson and Christian Kirk, was that enough? Absolutely not. And with 7 guys that have 1 year remaining on their contract with the Houston Texans, you look at the Houston Texans' need to invest in that offensive line room like you guys need to invest into your ride. They needed to bring a player that has the ability to get on the same page with their quarterback in CJ Stroud, grow with their quarterback in CJ Stroud. And with Nico Collins being a top guy in that room, mirroring a player with similar traits only allows for the Houston Texans to possibly find themselves in a position to cause defenses double trouble, right? Heavy duty, durability, that's Jayden Higgins. Rugged, absolutely. Dream big, go big, that's Jayden Higgins with his ability to create plays down the field. In 2023, nearly 18 yards per catch. In 2024, nearly 15 yards per catch. That's what he does. So when it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer. And that's what I think Jayden Higgins will do here in Houston. It's clear that the top pick for this year's draft is our Nissan Armada pick, and he's ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in real life with a new Nissan Armada or any of their outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Welcome back, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. I am extremely excited for the Houston Texans after this year's draft. I felt like once they moved out of the first round, I said it here on the show, I thought that was a mistake, but I also felt like moving forward, it was a win-win situation for the Houston Texans. There was no pressure there after round 1. And I also felt like because they mentioned time and time again, hey, guys, listen, our board isn't as long as other guys, right? We like the players we like. And Nick Caley said, yeah, we were surprised. One of the players was still available who we thought would be gone. And so they did a good job of setting themselves up for the future, which is why I think the first 3 picks were great for Houston. And even some on the back end, which we'll talk about on another show. Today is just dedicated for the first 3 picks because I do believe those first 3 picks will be in play for either a starter or guys that we'll see have an impact for this team throughout the year. And now we got to look at the 6'6", 330-pound tackle that shined against Abdul Carter, killed it during the Senior Bowl week, a place the Texans have found good talent since the arrival of Nick Caley, Aireontae Ersery, Minnesota tackle. The kid has consistent feet. They move when he moves, and they move into the action of the play. And let's take a minute to kind of dissect that a little bit, man. Like we saw a lot of times last year where the footwork wasn't good on some of the guys on the inside specifically, right? And also, you didn't necessarily see a lot of those guys get nasty, okay? And then they wouldn't necessarily move inside to the action. It was, so for Houston, again, I can only reiterate what they've been saying, and that is they're comfortable with their offensive line and the pieces that they brought in. There has been a big amount of pressure placed on Cole Popovich, and that will be the offseason storyline, I think, all offseason, all year, once we get to training camp. If the offensive line doesn't perform, then Nick, D'Amico, and Cole, it's on you guys. You decided to hire in-house to keep a voice around. Granted, that should have been a voice, apparently to some inside sources. He should have been the voice the entire time. He should have been the guy that was supposed to be coaching that team and that unit the entire time. Chris Strausser was a guy that was A 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Okay. So we look at that situation. But the talk of the town all offseason, whether it's on the radio, podcast, on social media for content creators, because my man Ruben, Mr. 713, he was not happy with how the Houston Texans finished this draft. He didn't think that was enough in terms of bringing in protection for CJ Stroud. So that's going to be where we see this team either made or broke down. What production they get from their guys up front. And that leads me back to Aireontae. Again, I think he fits the Houston Texans right now vision and their long-term vision, maybe more so long-term, but I do think he'll compete this year to play guard. And if that's the route Houston goes, I'm inclined to believe he needs to stay there. Do not do this young man like we saw Titus Howard throughout his career, right? If it's inside, let him stay inside. But he is an interesting prospect simply because it's a crowded room. I gave you guys the numbers earlier to kick off today's show. There is currently 8 tackles, including Howard, which I think we'll see shifted inside to secure that left guard role. Right guard, the absence of Shaq Mason, the insertion of Ed Ingram, That's where the concern comes in. You got 8 tackles, 5 guards. So the journey to start is a little bit easier at guard. Right now, based off of what we've seen from the young man coming into college and what we've seen from the Ed Ingram, the Thompson during the time in the NFL, I think he has a notch because of youth and also because, again, he's coming into a situation where he can be coached up. And from a coaching aspect, I can get more out of a guy I'm coaching up from ground zero compared to a guy that's been in the league, and I may have to coach him down to what I need for him to be. So I think that plays a role in his favor in terms of being able to start. But again, with coaching and the coacher, they can put players out there, find positions for those guys to succeed, which is why I look at the battle of Aireontae, Fisher, and Ingram. Who is moving inside? Who is staying inside? Who is making sure Trent Brown doesn't outplay them? Who's securing that right tackle position? And because the bigger body frame that Aireontae has, he can get to the next level with power. He could play himself right into the guard position for Houston. And that will give, again, the foundation of this offense, the youth, the talent, and Cole Popovich's influence to get the most out of these guys. That's why the conversations throughout the year, if we see CJ go down 50 plus times next year, it's going to be some very uncomfortable conversations. But back to the draft, these 3 players that Houston brought in, I think that they did a very good job of making sure that they have extensive research on each player, looked at each player's strengths and weaknesses, compared them to the players here on the roster, and it is clear that Noel and Higgins, those are 2 guys. Listen, some of you players that are already here, what Deion said, bringing their own luggage. They're bringing their own luggage. The competition this summer is going to be hot. It ain't going to be just the Houston Heat, right? Training camp is going to be fun. It's going to be fire because 12 receivers without Tank Dell, somebody has to go. And also for Frank Ross, the possibility of finally getting a return specialist that you don't have to switch every other game. Thank you guys for watching today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. We'll dive into the rest of the picks on the next show. We'll get Big Sarge back for that, hopefully. But I am John Hickman. Please be sure to subscribe, like, and follow to the Locked On Texans podcast on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast. Follow me on Twitter at John_Hickman12. And I just want to say this. When it comes to drafting players for the Houston Texans, trust John Stradamus. Trust Slick Casario. Trust me. Trust me with your life. And trust the Locked On Texans to keep bringing you good content throughout the week. Until next time, ladies and gents, Texan fans, I think y'all had a good draft. Bulls on parade. Peace.